Hey everyone, and welcome back to Cloud Automation Guide, where we simplify DevOps, cloud, and automation for everyone. In this video, we're building a cloud template in VMware Aria Automation. Cloud templates are the heart of infrastructure as code in Aria. They define what you deploy, how it's configured, and which resources it consumes within your cloud infrastructure. Today, I'm going to show you how to create a simple but powerful cloud template to deploy a virtual machine to vSphere with just the essentials: operating system image, size, disk, and network. Let's get started. First off, what are cloud templates? Cloud templates are basically a declarative YAML file which describes your infrastructure as code. It supports reusable components like images, flavors, networks, disks, and more. This allows you to treat infrastructure like software: consistent, versioned, and automated. In order to be able to begin creating a cloud template, first we have to log into our Aria Automation console. From there, you're going to click on Assembler, and then you're going to click on the Design tab. From here, you're going to click the New From button menu, and you see you have three options: Upload, to upload an existing YAML template that you may have; Terraform, to upload a Terraform template; or Blank Canvas, to create from scratch. For this example, we're going to use a blank canvas. First thing we do is give it a name. I'm going to call it just my demo Linux. Search for a project with which to associate this cloud template. For me, what I tend to do is I create a project specifically for the development and test of my templates. So I put everything there by default. And then in order to make sure that when I'm done and ready to deploy this for users, that I check the box to allow an administrator to share this with any project within the organization. If I had share only with this project, then this template would only be able to be deployed by members of the templates project. So we check that box and we can send it to anyone. So now what you'll see is this is the Cloud Template Designer. Over on the left-hand side, you have all of the different types of objects that are supported for inclusion onto your cloud template. Okay. And then in the middle, this is where your canvas is, where when you drag and drop these objects onto the canvas, they will show up here. On the right-hand side is the area for your YAML code, where you can make manual inputs to the code directly. First thing we're going to do is we're going to actually start building out our cloud template with a machine, disk, and network object. And we're going to go against a backend vSphere environment. So what's first over here on the left-hand side, click at the top, and then you can actually filter based upon what it is. You can filter based upon the platform like vSphere, or you can do NSX, or you can do AWS and see the supported objects. Or if you're trying to look for something like I'm looking for a machine, you can say, okay, I want to do a machine, and then it will show you all the different types of machines that it currently supports based upon what it supports out of the box, as well as potentially any additional plugins you may have installed or endpoints that you may have actually connected to. In this case, we're going to go with the vSphere virtual machine, so we're going to drag it onto the canvas. And notice over on the right-hand side, your YAML automatically populates based upon what you've added to the canvas. There is a little red icon here. It means that there's something wrong with this. So if we take a look and we see over here on the right on line 7 next to image, it basically says it needs a value. Now, the image property is a reference to image mappings within Aria Automation. And if you've seen my other video on creating image and flavor mappings, an image mapping is basically a friendly name that you define, which allows you to include within that object, the image mapping object, basically all of the cloud templates and images from all the different infrastructure endpoints on the back end to be referred to by a common name. So if you had in my case, I have an AWS endpoint, which has all sorts of different types of images in it, even for the same operating system version, like Ubuntu has a bunch of different AMIs for maybe even 22.04. There may be, a couple dozen different AMIs. So what I'm able to do is I'm able to go to the cloud template, excuse me, the image mapping, create a name called Ubuntu 22.04 in this use case, and select a single AMI for a single uh, AWS endpoint, and then include it in that image mapping. I'm also able to select a vSphere template within our VM template within my vCenter and also include it in that name. So to just give you an example real quick of what that looks like, if we come over to the image mapping, there's my Ubuntu image mapping, which you see as a possible option over here in my cloud template. And taking a look at my image mapping, you see I have an AWS and a vCenter endpoint, and I have two completely different named references within the infrastructure. So what this means is if I come over here and include Ubuntu in this cloud template, depending upon the infrastructure where the virtual machine is actually being built, in this case it's a vSphere virtual machine, it will then be built from this VM template within this vCenter. We also have the option, we can either manually specify CPU and RAM sizes here, or we can also, to make things possibly a little more user-friendly, both for the user as well as for the people managing the infrastructure, is we can use something called flavor. The flavor refers to the flavor mapping. So you'll see here I have three flavor mappings, small, medium, and large, and kind of as a rehash for flavor mappings, it's similar to image mappings in that you can create a single name, which kind of basically is referenced depending upon the environment. For Amazon, I've defined small for the flavor name to equal T2 micro in AWS, but to be 2 processors and 4 gigs of RAM with one CPU, one processor per one logical core per socket. That means small. So small means T2 micro in AWS or 2 processors and 4 gigs of RAM within vSphere. Whereas a medium is a T2 medium in AWS versus 4 CPUs and 8 gigs of RAM in vSphere, and so on and so forth. So by doing it by using t-shirt sizings, for lack of a better term, we are able to possibly make things easier on the user, as well as provide more standardized VM deployments within the backend infrastructure, which makes things a little bit easier for the infrastructure admins when it comes to, planning, resource utilization and growth and and the like. So that is the basic of a cloud template which only contains a machine object, but for this use case, we are also going to include network and storage. So let's go ahead and do a network. And we want, in this case, let's do a vSphere network, drag and drop. And you see that that network then gets added to this cloud template. Now, these two objects are not connected. So if I deploy from this cloud template, it will deploy this vSphere virtual machine and it will actually allocate the network, but it won't actually attach the virtual machine to the network. In order to do that, you have to actually click this little circle icon, drag and drop, and then now you will see underneath the virtual machine object, you have this networks property. The networks property is then linked to the ID of this network up here. And that's basically when you look at the YAML code, you say, okay, this machine is attached to a network and is attached to network one, which network one is up here. So now your virtual machine is attached to the network. So now let's add a disk. Drag and drop a disk, same thing. The disk is here, but it's not actually attached to the virtual machine. So we drag and drop. It doesn't really matter which direction, right? In this case, because it'll just get connected. And now when you take a look at the virtual machine object, you now that see is attached to a disk. You also have the size here. It's specified underneath the property. If you're interested in knowing which properties are available for which object, you can actually kind of select the object, and then you've got this little light bulb icon that if you click, it kind of prevents you or provides you a complete list of all of the properties which are possible within that object itself. It doesn't exactly give a definition, but it does show you kind of what the property, and you can kind of figure things out. Otherwise, go to the documentation, the official tech docs at Broadcom on the Aria Automation documentation, and there is a section there underneath the Cloud Assembly document on all of the custom properties that you can configure on your virtual machines as well as your objects. So that's one thing that you have in here. This is just the straight editing of all of this YAML code directly. If you would like a more graphical user-friendly interface, if you want to edit a property, let's say the disk object, you can click the disk object and you can come to the properties section. And the property section will show you what's currently configured and give you the ability to edit it. Now, if you want to see all possible properties, you can click on the show all properties and it will show you everything that you can actually configure in a user-friendly tab, right? And then you can edit it, and we'll call this disk 1 just for the name. Okay, and now that we've actually edited it, all right, that's if you click on the little icon here, you can then come here and just set the raw value as well. But if you set it here, that's fine. And then if we come back over to the code, you take a look at the actual property, it now has this property called name with a value of disk 1, which is exactly what we configured here. And if we were to select the virtual machine and see all of the possible virtual machine properties, right, you can set something in here like you want, like the name, my VM, right? And then you come back to code and look and see, lo and behold, now I have a property called my VM. Pretty cool, huh? So another thing, so now that we have everything set here, technically you could go ahead and deploy this virtual machine if you wanted to. One thing though is that you'll notice that we've actually hard-coded values in here, right? And so what that means is because we've hard-coded the value in the property of the cloud template, the idea is with cloud templates that I said in the intro, they're supposed to be reusable, right? And so what happens is if you were to use this cloud template as is for multiple deployments, every single virtual machine would be called my VM. But that's not going to work because you don't want to have a whole bunch of machines named the same in your environment. And then in many cases, it will actually result in failures. So what we can do is instead of hard coding down here the value, we can actually use something called inputs. And these are inputs that are basically prompts the person who's requesting the cloud template to provide some data. You have two ways that you can do inputs. Just like the YAML code, you can edit raw here, something, VM name, right? Type string, right? And this is all well and good, default. The default value is, my VM. But, if you're not familiar with what inputs, are available to you or like how to format them or what type of properties are there, you can use the inputs field. Now, one thing to note is the name of the input, you can name it whatever you want, right? It doesn't have to be, it could be, John Doe, right? And then type string description, you know, input VM name, stuff like that. Uh, So, or if you don't know those things, then what you can actually do is you can come over to the inputs tab itself. You can say, I'm going to create a new input, and then here we go. What do you want to name it? I'm going to say this is the VM name. That's going to be the name of the input parameter, but name of VM. Display name, however, is the name that's actually displayed to the user. If you do not provide a display name for your input, it will use the actual name of the input. So some of us as developers, we tend to create these parameters which are named something that may not exactly be, you know, descriptive, or we can do VM name input param, right? And if you were to present that to a user, they're kind of like, I kind of know what that means, but that looks all crazy. So here, let me just do name of the VM. I'll present that to the user. And then for the description, we can say provide a name for the VM. And then here we go. If you're trying to create an input, but you don't know exactly, is this a string? Is it an integer versus a number versus Boolean versus an object versus an array? What are my options here? If, in this friendly inputs view, you can actually see. And then you can define things like your default value. Do you want to define the default value? Constant means I'm just going to say, you know, default VM name, and that would be the name of the VM. External source, we're not going to go into the example of it, but an external source could be basically an Aria orchestrator action, which generates a value for us automatically. Do we want to encrypt the value of this parameter or not? Do we want to make it read only so that way it's set and the user cannot do anything with it? Underneath more options, you have like, how do you want this formatted? Like, so let's just say it was a number, right? You could do a date time format or not do any format. You can set minimum and maximum lengths for the value that they provide. The pattern, this is a regex expression, regular expression format that you would basically, like if you had a certain naming standard, in the case we're talking about virtual machine names, if you had a certain naming standard that you wanted users to adhere to, right, you could develop a regex for that naming convention, and then you could enforce it here. When you're coming to, if you want to create for some reason a list of possible values, you use the enum, right? And this would be for something like, let's say you were asking users to select a data center location, and you had within your infrastructure, DC1, DC2, DC3, right? For whatever reason, that's the value of the data centers, but the users know them as east, west, and central. So you could do, a key value, right? You could say the key is the friendly name, so you could call this east DC, and this could say the value would be DC1. And then you would do west DC, and the value would be DC2, right? And so that would be what that would look like. And then if you were to look at the actual code, right, this is what it ends up looking like here, right? I have an error because the type is wrong. It's not actually, it's just not wrong. It's not right for the demo purposes. So let me come back over to the input and change this. It's just going to be a value. It's not going to be enumerated at all, just for cleanliness sake. Right now it's happy because it's actually a string versus an array. Right, so you'll see though the GUI does let you do some things. It doesn't prevent you from doing certain things, which may end up causing errors, but it will not let you actually save and publish the cloud template if you have any errors. So that's the basics of how to actually create a cloud template. There is a whole lot more here that we're not going to go into this video as far as the possibilities for creating things. Oh, sorry, real quick. So we created this input. I was talking about not hard coding values. So for instance, if we want to allow the user to provide the name of the virtual machine, right? We've created an input for them to provide the virtual machine value, and now we want to pass that into the property of the virtual machine so that whatever the user provides, that's what the VM is named. And so to do that, we have to reference that input. So the way that we do that is we come down to the property, and then it's $ open bracket input to reference our inputs section dot, and then the name of the property, not the friendly name, not the title, right? But the actual name of the property. Now that we've done this, when the user will request this cloud template, they will be prompted to provide the name of a virtual machine, and then the virtual machine will have this property set with that value. Okay? So if you want to make this template available to users within the catalog, you first have to click version, and you have to release this version to the catalog. It's a good idea to give it a description of what the cloud template represents. And then I'll just say this is my demo cloud template, um, VM, disk, and network. And then changelog is just basically when you do your version control, you can actually easily quickly look to see what's going on. You can say this is the initial commit. So I've now created a new version and we're good to go. So once this is all good to go, now I can test this to see whether or not that these components would be able to be deployed within the environment. So to do that, I come down here and I hit test and see I'm being prompted to provide a name of a VM. I'll just call this VM1 and then I hit test. And then what it's going to do is it's going to take a look at all of the components on here and the values of the properties and see whether or not it would be successful in being deployed. And as you can see, it is successful. If you want to get more details on what was evaluated, you can click on provisioning diagram, open a new window, and it's going to come over to our request details. If you, for whatever reason, are trying to troubleshoot something and do not see the provisioning diagram link, just come to the infrastructure tab and come down to requests. Find the request, and then you can click on it and it'll show you exactly what it's trying to do. But that would only works, sorry, that only works for things that have actually deployed. If you're looking at your actual, this is kind of like held in memory. It doesn't actually commit it to the log. So you actually have to click on the request and it'll show you everything that it did. So it goes through 3 different pieces. It'll allocate storage, network, and the machine itself. So this is where you can see what storage is it going against. Because it's a vSphere disk, it only matched against our vCenter Cloud Zone. Right? And then it took a look at any storage profiles, which I don't have any, so it was just automatically approved. For the network, it found a network to use. I have 3 network profiles. I'm not going to go into all that piece, but basically I have three network profiles configured, each for a different network, and any one of these are eligible because we did not actually specify an identifying attribute to select a single network. That's a little bit more advanced when it comes to cloud templates. Not too terribly difficult, but if you were to look for uh, cloud templates and capability tags and constraint tags, you would find examples. I have some as well that show you how to attach capability tags to resources and then configure constraint tags within virtual machine or cloud templates. So if you take a look at my video and blog on cloud templates with Aria Automation and NSX integration, specifically a multi-tier cloud tenant, you'll see an example there of where I did constraint tags on a cloud template to basically link it to a network profile and for a network. So, but if you don't specify a constraint tag, it will choose any one of the resources. Next, you've got the virtual machine. So the virtual machine, it basically goes through the same process. I'm going to take a look at the VM. I'm going to see what it is I'm asking for. Are there any constraints on the VM? If there are not, then basically any one of the resources in the endpoint that it's going to be talking to are eligible for placement. So as you can see, we take a look at the different projects. There's a few different projects that I have configured in the environment. And then after that, it's going to identify what cloud zones are available to all those projects. And then it's going to evaluate what kind of machine is being deployed and which one of my endpoints supports that virtual machine. In this case, we only have one vSphere endpoint, and so that matches. We specified a small flavor mapping, and yes, there is a small flavor mapping defined for this vCenter. Same thing with the image mapping. We defined an image mapping within the cloud template, and yes, there is that same image mapping within that vCenter, or there is an image mapping which contains a virtual machine template within that vCenter, so that's valid. So we can continue. And then it takes a look at the cloud zones that are available to the project. And there is a cloud zone configured. There are no constraint tags defined within the cloud template, so any one of the clusters are eligible for deployment. So everything's green, we're good to go. So we come back to our cloud template. and then we can then deploy it straight from here as a basic test. So I'm going to call this my test deployment. Let me just call it test 5 in case I've got something out there already. You can choose if if you have different versions of the cloud template, you can choose which one. Typically, you're going to just use the current one. And then name of the VM. I'm going to call this my test VM. And then we're going to deploy. And then it pops up this nice little window where it will build out the topology. It'll basically end up looking just like the cloud template that we built. Over on the right-hand side, you'll end up seeing properties of the resources as, when they get built, the name of it, the object ID, for instance, the cloud vSphere object, that's the first one to come up. And if we take a look at the custom properties, we can start seeing information about it. The one thing here underneath the history tab, you can see everything that's going on with this cloud template deployment. It's first you did a request, initializes, then it starts allocating the network, and it started and finished. Then it starts on the disk. You'll see it end up finishing, right? And then it does the virtual machine, it allocates a VM, its resources, and then finishes. And then if we were using something called approval policies, then it enters this phase to check to see if there's any approval policies in play. You're going to see that there's not. And then it goes and it's starting to create objects like our disk and our network. The machine will take a little bit, but basically that's it when it comes to uh, the cloud template and testing and deploying. Um, but when you take a look like the network here, you can say what network's it going to. It ended up going to the web network. This is the CIDR of the network. And you can see more information configured on the network, like what's the DNS server configured, etc. So when you test this in your environment, just play around, get to know it a little bit. It'll help when it comes to troubleshooting. Um, but yeah, so just keep an eye on it, and then watch what it does. If it fails, it'll pop an error up here. You see, you also still have the provisioning diagram in here, and so it looks a little bit different this time. We've got the allocations, and then we actually have the provisioning actions, and what is it doing. So for some takeaways, uh, always try to use image mappings and flavor mappings where possible, especially image mappings. Um, you can get away with not doing flavor mappings. You can allow a little bit more customization for your users when it comes to the amount of CPU and memory. Be sure though, as infrastructure admins, that you make sure that you set limits on what it is that users can actually request. Either hard, one, you need to definitely have hard limits, especially on CPU. You don't want users requesting a virtual machine with more CPU than what the physical server actually can provide. That'll create stability issues within your infrastructure, as well as if you're deploying to public cloud, the bill alone, the management will not be happy. Um, image mappings, image mappings are a must. It provides so much flexibility in the environment. And then like if somebody renames a virtual machine template within vSphere and you have hard coded the virtual machine template name within your cloud template, everything breaks. Um, Granted, if they do the same thing, your cloud template also breaks, but at least then if you have a single cloud template for, say, Ubuntu, right? You only have to update it there. But if you have 15, 20, 30 cloud templates for Ubuntu and you've hard coded the name of the virtual machine template, in each one of them, you have a lot of information that you have to update. Um, Always assign your template to a project. You have no choice. Like I showed you, use a templates project for all of your tests and development. That way you can make changes freely without possibly impacting users. Um, Build your templates in small chunks and test often. Um, if you were to take a look at some of my orchestrator code that I write, I follow this process. You know, even a basic orchestrator action or even a cloud template, like 50 to 100 iterations because you want to make a change and you want to test it. You don't want to make 3, 4, 5 changes and then end up having to troubleshoot, two or three of the components that you've made changes to. And it just creates a nightmare. If you have hair, you'll go gray. If you tend to lose it, you'll probably go bald. So just make small iterative changes. And then lastly, use inputs. What I provided here for like the virtual machine name, use inputs and then map them over to the properties. Hard code as little as possible within the properties of your cloud templates. And that'll end up making your life a whole lot easier, and it will end up making your cloud templates reusable and scalable. So that is all for cloud templates. Thank you for watching. If this has helped you get started with cloud templates, please drop a like and subscribe for more Aria automation tutorials. You can find a copy of this YAML template that we built today, as well as other cloud templates, Aria automation resources, and orchestrator resources, as well as step-by-step guides at cloudautomationguide.com. In the next video, we will connect this template to a content source so you then can publish to the service catalog. See you there.